Uh, hello and welcome to the Women's National Book Association's conversation with the brilliant and inspiring podcast, There She Goes, a collection of women travel narratives from women who are far braver than I am. This is the first event we are doing for Women's History Month at the New Orleans chapter, the Women's National Book Association. I would very much like to encourage all of you, if you are not members, to join us. We are an organization that works to promote both the opportunities for and the focus on women authors, because we believe that the world would be better if the 50% of the population that was for a very long time even excluded from literacy could express their narratives in the world, set their stories free, and tell their truths. We are recognized as an NGO by the UN because we also have an advocacy in literacy role. If you join the New Orleans chapter, we have a new membership benefit. If you publish a book within a calendar year that starts in the fall, in October, and goes through the next October, we will now include you in a member book launch party. In other words, if you launched a book during the year, we'll pour some champagne for you and let you sell your books and read, because we really, really value women writers, and we really, really value what they have to say. And we work on things like reclaiming herstory, academic work, and we have a relationship with archivists of a variety of kinds. This month, we have this event, and then at Southeastern Louisiana University, we also have the event called Anonymous and Her Daughters, which is an academic panel discussion that is going to talk about women's writing that has been either misunderstood, miscategorized, trivialized by a variety of academic writers. And then in April, the second half of April, we are going to have a member reading. If you are a member and would like to read at that reading, please send an email to the WMBA NOLA email, because we very much want to include you. And again, if you're not a member, please consider joining. We're a not-for-profit that is tax deductible, and we want to celebrate you if you are an aspiring woman writer or a woman who reads books by women authors. So again, once more, now that we have a bit of a Zoom crowd, I'm going to take a sip, and I'm going to invite you to join me in welcoming the hosts, who are my rock stars every week when they come out with a new podcast episode of the podcast There She Goes, Lavinia Spalding and Kelly Chappie. And they have brought with them the distinguished travel writer and editor, Marcia DeSantis. And these women know things that we don't know, and they have traveled the world and seen things. Thank you for coming, and welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, Anne.
It's a great, great pleasure. And I would like to start by asking why you think that there should be a podcast about women travel writers. Why is that something that you thought should even happen?
Well, it was Kelly's idea, so I'm going to launch this one over.
You're going to punt that to me.
I'm going to pass that one to you.
I could send it back to you, because I could say it was your voice that I heard telling your story.
Just do that all night, go back and forth.
So it was very mid-pandemic, and I was in my home a lot. I live in northern Alabama. Lavinia and I had met once before. She lives in New Orleans. And I was baking some bread, as many of us were doing in those early days. And I heard her reading the introduction to what turned out to be the anthology of women's travel writing, and it was like a lightning bolt. I just knew that we should do this, and I sent her a text. We didn't really know each other; we'd met once, and I said, "This is something we have to do, and I hope you'll do it with me." Um, I didn't really know I don't listen to podcasts. Anyway, so it was a bit of a shot in the dark, but it made perfect sense to me nonetheless. And so here we are, heading into season 2.
And I'll
And-
just follow
Yes,
that up
please.
to say that what she had heard was me reading the introduction to an anthology that I edit. I've edited 6 of the series. There are 12 in the series. It's called The Best Women's Travel Writing. This is the most recent volume. This was volume 12. So I've edited 6 of them. Marcia DeSanctis has been in all 6 of the ones that I've edited. That's how we met, actually, is I fell in love with the first story she sent, and then every one after. But so I've been editing women's travel writing for, I guess, a decade now, and writing travel stories for 20 some years. And so, so I have a lot to say on the subject of why women's travel matters, but I don't think you asked me that yet. You just
But I
asked
am
why a
asking it right
podcast.
now because I really want to know why you bother to do this thing that has made me your fangirl.
Oh, that's so sweet. Well, so I think that Marcia and Kelly and I all agree probably that I don't want to speak for the 2 of you, but I think that, I mean, to me, women's travel stories, women's true travel essays, the value there is the same as women's literature. I mean, it's this, we read beautiful words, we're swept away. We are, given someone else's experience. It's just the same as literature. In this case, I think that it has sort of another maybe deeper purpose, which is that we also connect to people in places that we don't know. People, we get beyond the headlines of a place in a very intimate way when we read a true personal essay from that place. So, Marcia, you haven't said anything yet, and you are one of my absolute favorite travel writers.
Thank
So
you
weigh
so
in
much.
on
Well, I was so honored to be on your podcast this year. I think I recorded it maybe, I don't know, there was like a storm. I was in my closet, there was a storm howling and my dog was howling at the storm. So I have no idea, what that even sounded like, but I love what you said about how we can connect to our surroundings, we can connect to people, we can connect to to our own curiosity, I guess. But I think that when we travel, I think that, and some people might argue whether or not this is valid, but I believe it's highly valid that we also connect to ourselves, just in a way that is whenever sometimes distance really adds clarity to anything that is going on in your universe, in your life, in your work, in your family, in your head, working out things with your marriage and your childhood and your, and your just concerns about life in a way. And I do think that kind of breaking off from your customary surroundings, from your moorings, kind of putting just the bare minimum of what you need. You have a closet full of things and you bring 2 pair of pants and 3 shirts and you sort of pare down to the essence of who you are. And I think that helps you lighten your emotional load and maybe figure things out from a distance.
Right.
Well said.
And the writing of that, the writing down of it helps you connect to it so on such a deeper level. So any
Mhm.
traveler can have that experience of having sort of I don't know, breakthroughs on the road, having the experience of you know, epiphanies, insights. But then when you sit down and you write it all down, it gets so much deeper. And I think that that's what we find in these travel essays, in the anthology, and on the podcast.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe not fair, but maybe no surprise to sort of say that, you know, women can kind of connect with these emotional stories or identify them or separate them out, you know, in little skeins, in ways that maybe men don't or won't.
Mm.
Yeah,
We
I-
won't
I-
say that they can't.
exactly. I
I
won't say.
have a question about your editorial choices, both for the podcast and perhaps for the anthologies you've worked on together, which is what is very clear when one listens to There She Goes, is that I am not listening to Condé Nast Travelers discussion of the best beaches in Florida. Nothing wrong with the beaches in Florida, but that is not where you are going. And as someone who has studied medieval literature, the stories that you have told remind me often of the first autobiography written by a woman in the English language, which was the autobiography, the narrative of Marjorie Kemp. And she goes on pilgrimage kind of all over, but it is in fact, as Marcia is saying, an inner journey. So why have you created then this forum for what could only be called relatively unconventional narratives? Even when you travel, you have travelers discussing a conventional tourist site like Mont Saint-Michel, it's because the tourist has an unusual and actually dangerous experience there.
Yeah.
What was your,
That was Marcia's story.
oh, was it? Can I just say, can I be a fangirl for 30 seconds and say,
Sure.
loved your
Yeah.
narrative.
Well, if you like
Love,
medieval
listen to it
stuff-
3 times.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, please answer my question now that I'm fangirlish.
So I mean, I do think that it sort of goes back to what I was saying. It's the same as, you know, the value of just great literature, great personal essay. You get inside someone's mind, and travel, you know, with travel, you get these incredible breakthroughs. You know, it's travel is such a gateway to consciousness, to a deeper consciousness, I think. You know, you're so tilted off your axis when you're traveling, and anything can happen and things don't go as planned. And so it really lends itself to being more than just a you know, an adventure or a trip. You know, I think that that it you know, it's almost always an interior journey. And so those are definitely the stories that we look for, right, Kelly? I mean, I think that there's a lot of travel writing out there that doesn't really, you know, descend into the interior journey, but that wouldn't interest us.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking for stories, more than travel stories, and stories that women would tell in their own voices, which I think adds another layer of vulnerability and unusualness. And in terms of we didn't, neither one of us had ever done a podcast before, and it's not an interview podcast. It's strictly storytelling. We do a brief introduction, and then it goes to the important meat, which is the story and the storyteller, and in their own voice. And you know, I work in textiles, and sometimes when you're working on projects, or when I'm working on projects, I choose to work on projects with materials I have, and that changes the sort of the form that it allow, and then within that you find freedom, I think. And as we began to build the stories and the season, it turned out very quickly to be like that. Like we're putting together a quilt of sorts. So, once you have one story that's about loss, you don't want all of your stories to be about loss. And we weren't choosing a theme. We won't for season 2. We won't choose a theme for the season. But then we have to try and be awake and pay attention to the stories that we have, and look and see if there are places where we could use some bolstering, either for mood or season. And we didn't think about that either in the beginning. It was, some of the stories are summertime stories, right? Or spring stories. And so, and maybe it depends when you hear it. It may not be that time, but at least for us in the creation of it, those were things that felt important. Diversity felt important, and so working with that as well, taking all those bits into place for our quilt that we wove for the season.
Right.
I want to compliment you on that in particular, because I think that it could have been the Algonquin Roundtable of translators, but instead you have women who are intersectionally feminist from various groups and affiliations of a variety of kinds. And in some of those narratives, I think of the woman who was both, I believe she was African and Buddhist. Is that correct? Am I remembering her correctly?
Yep.
Yeah.
Faith.
I'm sorry, what?
Faith Adiele. She was the first, I always have to think about this. She was the first Black female, it was Thailand's first Black female Buddhist nun.
Yeah.
Yes, an unusual choice for a complex way of living authentically, I thought, at least in her telling. And a remarkable intersectionality, very fourth way, in fact.
Interesting, yeah.
The thing that I would like to understand about what you have gathered as a bouquet here, Lavinia, is how have you understood that to make that your stories could have the possibility of making the listener braver, particularly women listeners braver? It's to me, it was like magic in a time where we were all afraid of something.
It's funny. I've done
Politics.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would say it's interesting. I've done a lot of these readings for the anthology. I mean, I've edited 6, and I've probably done 20 for each, at least for each anthology. So I don't even know what the math is there, but I've done a lot of these readings. And I would say 1 out of 3 of those readings, some woman raises her hand and says, I really want to travel, but I'm kind of just afraid to do it on my own, or I'm afraid to do it. And and it's like she's asking permission from me to do it. And it's always interesting to me, because men just don't ask for permission. They just go. But I think that it's a really friendly world out there. I mean, the first time you go, things happen, sure, but most of the world will be really kind to you. And I think that is the approach that I always take when I travel. And so, yeah, I mean, I get some stories that are terrifying. And I think, wow, I would not want to do that, what she's doing. But every time I read one of those stories, yeah, it also makes me braver. I don't know. Marsha just returned from a month in Iceland by herself in the dead of winter, where she was alone, except for a dog, right? For a month.
I had the dog for a little while, thankfully, but yeah, it's interesting about the bravery thing, because one night I was walking home, there was no car, so I had to walk to the store and I had to put like spikes on my boots. And I was at a writing residency, and then I was doing a story for a magazine story, but I was, the wind was howling, the snow was blowing, it was pure white out, and you're not really thinking about bravery. I'm also not seeking out like the rapids or the extreme whatever, over the, I don't even know how to describe what extreme stuff is because it's so not my world, but you just get through it. You're like, I'm a person. It was very similar actually to Mont Saint Michel. I was sort of out in these, out in this weather. And what are you going to do? You can either stop and, end up at the side of the road, or you just keep going and you get home and like, oh, that was nothing. I'll put the tea on. So I do find that like physical safety, emotional safety, danger is pretty hard to find out in the world. Is probably a lot easier to find in this country, where there's certainly a lot of unpredictable and random danger, which doesn't exist so much in other parts of the world, except for, of course, in war zones where we are now. But yeah, you don't really think of bravery, but you also don't think of, sort of in that maybe masculine way, like, I'm going to go do it. You just kind of gathering your string for your story or for your ideas, and you just encounter things and you get through them. So it's just like little miniature life experience, little miniature microcosmic life experiences that just happen in short times or something.
I also think women are just inherently, I don't know, I think we are savvy. We're practiced at sort of correcting for safety all the time, for, assessing our surroundings, for doing gut checks, for not going down that dark alley in a way that some men might not be, they might go blindly down that alley. And, so I think that, I don't know, I feel generally safe when I travel. I also am rarely alone. Even when I travel alone, I have to sort of try to be alone if I'm traveling by myself, because it's too easy to meet people in a way. Kelly, what do you think about that?
About which part of that? I think sometimes also we find ourselves in the stories that we don't expect. And so that question of bravery, what is brave for me may not be brave for you. And what may look like it's, or be difficult for me may not be for you. It reminds me of a ropes course I did in college, where some people could go up to 80 feet and run and jump off the plank. And for others, it was shaking at 6 feet on the ladder. And I think there was something for me profound in that understanding that it's, it's different for all of us, but I'm not sure, Marcia, that I could put on the spikes and like go. I would just decide that I didn't need tea that night and I would stay in probably.
Food, you sort of do.
I may still decide for the night that I would just do it in the morning, but I think that it is just different under all those circumstances. And something about also, being for the podcast being locked down, I was really away from everybody, loved ones, and other than my husband, we saw a lot of each other. And so it was these tiny escapes that were just I was so grateful for. And so hopefully now it will transform into being the next layer, because even though the world is, opened for many, it's not for all. And travel is still, not possible for everybody. So.
I have a question specifically for you, Marcia. I was led to understand from the narrative you had at Mont Saint Michel that I listened to with some attention, that you have made a life of traveling really all over for a variety of writing assignments. The thing that I noticed that you captured, and indeed some of the other people that have been on the first season of There She Goes captured so thrillingly, was that sort of delightful sensation, which is 50% fear, 50% thrill, that the French call dépaysement. the state of losing one's country. And I'm wondering if you are conscious of that when you write, or if this is you just
Mm.
call your sensations and put them on the page.
It's a really good question. I think that I'm never aware of it at the time. I think, for me, often, and I've written so many of these stories, but I really don't know what the story is going to be until it's over. Sometimes even until I'm sitting at home or, in the grocery store, at the checkout line saying, I think that man was an angel, like
Mm.
the man who came, like, I don't know that he actually existed. And so I think that, again, you kind of, whatever, in this situation, the story was encountering weather and kind of being stupid about it and regretful about that. But I think in that situation, it was just something I kind of had to, maybe remove myself from, and even remove my fears and emotions to just kind of float above it to get through it. But I do feel like sometimes the wonder and amazement and even detachment comes after the fact. I don't know if you have that same situation, you guys, Lavinia and Kelly, but sometimes you just don't know. I mean, it can take you a year sometime to figure out what the story is.
Years. Sometimes,
Yeah.
sometimes it's a decade. Like I've had stories that I wasn't able to write until 10 years after the thing happened, after the trip.
Yeah,
Perspective.
right.
Right, or the pieces to the puzzle come in, they come into clarity, I think, sometimes. Or enough of those things happen, and then someone asks you that question, and you go, oh, right. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Oh.
I always call it, I just call it gathering string. When I was in Iceland working on this story, part of it was, as I said, a magazine piece, but people are saying, well, what's your story going to be? And I say, I'm gathering string and I'm going to weave it into a blanket. And that means interviews. That means, it turns out literally the best interview I did was the taxi driver on the way from the airport. Like I was there for a month, and the way from the airport, my first 10 minutes, I think, was the best interview that I did. And I'm thinking, I can't stop thinking about what that former sheep farmer turned taxi driver had to say about winter in Iceland, and sort of like, and interviewing the hotel manager and this important person and whatever, and like just gathering string, just gathering bits. Yeah.
I have a question for you specifically, Lavinia and Kelly. Some of our members are travel writers. Some have published travel narratives. Others of us are writers who travel. When you are editing an anthology, Lavinia, what do you look for, and how would one, do you put your stuff on Submittable and do a query, and do people query you? How does one get in your anthology, and what would impress you generally as potentially worth a second look?
That's a great question. So it's not on Submittable. I used to edit it once a year, and now it's every few years. But I'll put out a call on social media, on the Best Women's Travel Writing Facebook page, on my own social media. I usually have a few big name writers tweet it out for me. And then Traveler's Tales is the publisher, and they actually accept submissions all year long at travelerstalesstories.com. So, and I can put that in the chat, or maybe someone else can. travelerstalesstories.com. So
yes, please.
what I look for in a story. So this year, this year I think I got 1,600 submissions, and I think it was 16. was either 16 or 14. I can't remember how many, because I could only choose 30. And so that, it was intense. It was actually pretty funny. I was getting interviewed about the process of editing the anthology, and the interviewer said, "Oh, can you tell me how many you've gotten this year?" And I said, "Oh, sure. Let me just look through the database." And I looked through the database, and I did all of, I filtered for not full manuscripts, women, nonfiction, and it came up with 1,600. And I was like, well, the math's wrong. So I did it 3 more times. And then I went, oh shit, I got 1,600 essays. That's a lot, because I hadn't read in a few years. So the first thing I look for is great storytelling. That's so much of it is just great storytelling. Does it keep my interest? And, and does it have to be, some far-flung, place? No. I mean, honestly, like the first There She Goes stories is set on the Boudin Trail. It's Natalie Bazile, who wrote Queen Sugar, the novel that became the Oprah TV show. It can be domestic. It could be, in my hometown, but if it keeps my interest, then I look for it. And just really polished writing. In the beginning, when I was first editing the anthology, I would find a story that had great potential, and I would work with the writer a lot on it. But that was back when I was only getting like 300, 400 essays, submissions. But getting 1,600, I look for a really, really polished submission, like, not your 3rd draft, not your 6th draft, your 26th draft. That's what I want people to send me. It has to be true. It has to have depth. It should, something has to happen. It can't just be sort of a, meditation. I mean, that's not true. I've published a few of those. I have to fall in love with it.
Mm.
It makes me laugh. It's, it goes into the probably pile. If it makes me cry, it goes into the probably pile. If it makes me laugh and cry, it goes into the yes pile. And you have to stick the landing. That ending is so important. You can begin it anywhere. The middle can be, fixed, but the ending is just so important.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, that sums it up. That's about what I like.
Those are great pieces of indication of how you were thinking about it. I would ask you and Marcia and Kelly, if you have any writers who have maybe even have an MFA from a prestigious program. How does one become a travel writer after having become already a writer?
Well, after becoming a writer, I would just say it's a lot easier to become a travel writer by being a writer who travels than by being a traveler who writes. There are a lot of travelers out there who like to write. And there are a lot of bloggers, a lot of influencers, people like that. But if you're a writer already who likes to travel, I think it's a much easier thing. You just sort of start submitting, you start writing your stories down, focusing on, not the whole journey, but one discrete story, and then submitting those to the, travel journals, travel websites. There aren't a whole lot of magazines anymore that are that support long form features. What do you think, Marcia? You do a lot more travel writing than I do right now because I have a 6-year-old.
And you have a 6-year-old. Well, I think it's sort of important to demystify travel writing in a way. these aren't the days of Edith Wharton, who had, someone pack her bags and put them on a train. I mean, I have, I have a book coming out. I'll plug it, A Hard Place to Read.
Yay!
One of the,
So
one of the,
beautiful.
Please put the information in the
Thank
chat
you.
for us,
I
Marcia.
will. One of the essays takes place at in the most unglamorous town in the world called Waterbury, Connecticut, 15 miles from my house. And also another thing, in this book and also in Lavinia's collections and in Kelly and Lavinia's podcast, I think we and I'm big on this because this is sort of how I became a travel writer. Is I basically my first travel story was a memoir story. It was about somebody that I had met over 30 years ago. And it's interesting because I had originally just submitted it to Vogue, who I was writing for, and they said, well, it was kind of long ago. And then and somebody said, well, do you know this best women's travel writing, Traveler's Tales? Why don't you submit as a travel story? And I said, well, I mean, it did take place in the Soviet Union in 1983, but it's not like a travel story, but it turned out to be a travel story. And so I think that you don't have to like travel first class around the world, and you don't even have to travel around the world. And you don't have to have traveled anywhere for 30 years to make place a really, sort of the main character of your story, the main, the scaffolding of your story. Everything else is bits and pieces. But if the place where it takes place, or where the narrative unfolds, let's say, it can be, it can be 30 years ago, it can be down the road, but I think that's what a travel story is. So it isn't like I have to get on a plane and write a different kind of story about Paris. You can you can cast a wide net and submit it to Lavinia and to a lot of literary journals and online places, that publish writing about place.
Thank you. I want to ask a question to Kelly and Lavinia about when the new season drops, because I am slapping my veins for support of the There She Goes podcast with a couple of things to make me feel braver every week.
Aw. Kelly, why don't you take this one?
Well, all roads point to New Orleans at the moment. So here we're doing this. And then Saturday morning, hoping that there's not too much snow on the road, I will hit the road and drive 6 hours to meet Lavinia to attend an event for women's travel in New Orleans. And then we'll spend the better part of the weekend prepping more so soon.
And doing some recording.
Doing some recording. We're actually going to bring our mics. And then, and that's fun for us since we did it all. We never even Zoomed our whole first season. We didn't see each other our whole first season. So, so we're in a whole new world now and looking forward to that. So April, May, spring for sure.
For April.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have stories in the, what's the expression? In the pocket.
In the pot. We also have a sound engineer who thankfully is going back on the road a bit. He's a musician, so we're very happy for him to be doing some traveling again. So we have schedules that we have to manage, and that's good.
Yeah.
We have a question from one of our members. Ann Boyd Rue has written in chat if you want to see it. She says, I'd love to hear more about specific venues that publish travel writing. That would be a good place to start out for a writer who travels, and also tips on how to place a character in the story. To you to say what you would say.
Sure. For long form, my favorite online travel journals right now are Hidden Compass, Nowhere, and domestically the Statesider. And they all pay, I don't know how much, not a lot, 500 words or $500 or so for a feature. But those are my favorite online places right now, I would say. My favorite magazines are harder to break into. Marcia, you've sold so many essays lately. Tell them where to send their work.
Well, because I'm relentless, and I always say, I wrote this thing, it's not going to be in vain. So I've certainly had a lot, my share of rejection, like really massive amounts, but I'm pretty determined. But there are so many. I mean, really, just a Google search will help. I found myself, a lot of titles that I haven't heard about in Google searches. Then I go find them on Instagram or something. But there's others. There's The Common, and that's a literary magazine out of, I think, Amherst College, which publishes writing about place. And they have this one interesting column called Dispatches, and it's very short, or it's not very short, but it's like, I had a piece in there, it's maybe 1,000 or 1,200 words. There's something called Cargo Lit.
Yeah.
There is something called Odessa, and she is out of Florida, and she, pays a little bit, and it's a lovely magazine with beautiful pictures. And there's a whole bunch out there, actually. And
What about
also
Airmail? Is Airmail still?
Well, Airmail publishes, I write for Airmail, and it's interesting with them. They don't really publish travel essays. They publish more, it's a very journalistic site. So it's much more, a story I wrote for them was about, I went to St. Bart's, and that was really great. But I actually wrote a story about how they were repairing the infrastructure after Hurricane Maria. So you sort of combine travel with a hard news edge. But also all the literary magazines, there are thousands of them, and they're all unsubmittable. Literary magazines like, I don't know, like the Oxford Review, like, like Guernica, a lot of them publish travel essays. And I would say the only, the biggest secret to being a published travel writer is not to get discouraged. I mean, I have discussed this. I actually have an essay coming out about this very subject, but I mean, this this book of essays of mine has, like, I don't know how many thousands of rejections, associated with it, because it's just part of it. And you just, if you believe in your story, go back and maybe, do another pass and try again, and you will find a home for your work.
Yeah, I thought here's my book. I'll plug it again. I thought I would just say where some of these stories came from. So many of them were originals, but let's see, the Sonora Review, GeoX, Nowhere is great, Creative Nonfiction, Vice, Hidden Compass, Away. These are all places where they first appeared.
Away. I forgot about that one.
Entropy, that was yours. Headlights, amazing story. Is that in your book? Is Headlights in your book?
It is. Yeah.
Pilgrim magazine, Sierra magazine, Afar, Outside, Afar, Saveur. Is that how you pronounce that? Condé Nast Traveler, Smithsonian, San Francisco Chronicle, Hidden Compass, Powell's, the blog for Powell's.com. That's where Frangipani was. How do you pronounce that flower? Frangipani?
Yeah.
Help
It was
me, someone.
Mapingis. Yeah.
Did someone unmute themselves and tell me how to pronounce that flower? Frangipani?
I think it depends what language you're saying it in.
Nowhere and Off Assignment. Off Assignment actually is an amazing place to start. If you, actually, I have their book right here that just is coming out, but I have an essay in this. They have a section called Letter to a Stranger, and you just write to someone who haunted you. So to a stranger who haunted you. Marcia had a very, yours went viral or something, right? Your Letter to a Stranger?
Yeah, it took place at a urinal, so I guess who doesn't like a good story that takes place in a urinal?
The urinal in Prague, though.
In
So
Prague, yeah. Yeah. So this magazine is called Odyssa, Odyssa. And I wrote one of my favorite stories for that magazine. I didn't put it in my book because it wasn't so deep, but it was more of a, sort of a impressionistic piece. So it takes all kinds, and just keep your list of, of places to submit.
I have another question from the people who have attended. Elizabeth Manley is working on a nonfiction book about women's roles in Caribbean tourism development starting in 1890. And she's wondering whether you have been inspired by any historic travel writers.
One of my first was Beryl Markham. God, I loved her. I read her books. She was the pilot, West with the Night. That was a big one for me. How about you guys?
I would say
You have a lot of them, Marcia.
I do. Martha Gellhorn for sure. There's a writer called Dorothy Carrington who wrote about Corsica, who I love. Freya Stark, who
I love Freya Stark.
Explored the Middle East. Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah.
Edith
Jan Morris.
Jan Morris, Edith Wharton, that Lavinia wrote the intro to her book called A Motor Flight Through France, and really interesting travel writing there. But yeah, they tended to be women of great wealth and privilege, white women of privilege. That's a little bit how it was. They traveled because they could, or they were Egyptologists, or they were doctoral students at Oxford and things like that. Yeah,
Right.
it was different.
Well, I have one last question for you, and then I'll open the floor to some more questions if anybody has any. And then I want to say once more, everyone, please, if you have not joined the New Orleans chapter of the Women's National Book Association, and you found this discussion stimulating, interesting, useful, or just cool, this is your home. Welcome home. You have found your sisters for cocktails in town, and we want to know you. And on the chat, WNBA NOLA has a website that you can go to and join online. We have an event happening at Southeastern Louisiana University later this month, an academic panel discussion. One of our discussers is here, Lisa Moody. Dr. Lisa Moody is one of the writers who will be presenting. I'll be presenting something as well. And it's called Anonymous and Her Daughters, and that takes place on March 24th at 2 p.m. in the library of the university. And then if you join now, you can be part of our member reading, which will take place in the second half of April. Right now, we're looking at a Wednesday night on Prytania Street, probably at 7:30 p.m. April 27th, and there'll be wine, there'll be women with interesting stories, and lots of people who read a lot of books just like you do, who will be glad to geek out with you over a glass of wine afterwards. If you want to join, please look at our website, WNBANOLA.org. So my last question is, do you believe that little girls should be reading travel writing by brave and globe-trekking women. What difference would it have made to you as little girls to know the stories that you have read as travel writers and written as travel writers?
I mean, absolutely. I
Mm.
dedicated my I don't know, my second anthology to my 6-year-old goddaughter at the time, because I was really hoping that she would read it. I told her mom, like, don't have her read like this story and this story and this story and that story, but all the others are fine. I mean, I didn't travel. I didn't get on a plane until I was 18, I think, and I didn't leave the country until I was 25. But I think that you know, I don't think that everyone has the ability to travel, but
Yeah.
everyone has the ability to travel through stories, and I think that
Mm.
it's really important. I mean, if you have any y- girls, little girls in your life, I think it's important to start them early on travel narratives. If you have any young women in your life, buy
Mm.
pre-order Marsha's book right away and send it to them.
Thank you. I'll put a link up there. Hang on a sec. Thank you
Good.
so
Do
much.
that.
And
Yeah,
put a link for your podcast too.
Yes, please put the
I've done
podcast
it.
in the links. And it's
doing
called
two things at the same
There
time.
She Goes. They're dropped season. If you haven't heard season 1, it's not too late to hear it. Just go to where you get your podcast. They're all good episodes. As I mentioned, I have listened multiple times to some of them because they blew my hair back. And I can only imagine that season 2 is going to be twice as good as season 1.
It is true that, you know, most of the travel narratives in the world are by men. And if you go to the glossy magazines and the best American travel writing, you will see mostly the names of men. And it is also true that there are more female travelers in the world. I mean, that's the statistic, that they, you know, there are more female solo travelers, that women make the most travel decisions. I mean, even if they're partnered, they're the ones making the decisions. And there are more, that they spend more money than men. I mean, this isn't business travel, this is recreational travel. So it doesn't really make sense that women aren't as represented in the travel writing world. And so, you know, anything that we can do to further that cause, we're pretty psyched about. So,
Well, tonight
And
was a nice little toehold for spreading the gospel of women being swashbucklers, I think.
Yeah, and your question about you know young women and girls reading, it made me think about. I mean, probably one of my favorite books when I was young was Helen Keller. It was like a large format book, and I was little. We traveled a lot by ourselves. I was 5. My brother was 3 when we flew together alone for the first time without parents, which was illegal. And they asked my brother how old he was, and he held up 3 fingers and said he was 5. But that was back in the day where, you know, your parents would get you on a plane, buckle you in, and then get off, and then say, you know, you'll meet grandma and grandpa at the other end. So I've been traveling alone really since I was 5, and just have sort of never stopped. And so, you know, obviously lucky to have been able to do that. But anytime I think we can imbue that sense of possibility with young people, I think the value of that and the duration for which it spreads, you know, is long and wide, and always positive.
It's funny. You know, my kids have seen me just, they're grown and out of the house now, but they've seen me go off alone forever and have always
Yeah.
thought like, my mom is so, you know, she's just so brave. She goes and does her stories. And But I have to admit, when I think my daughter's 24, and when I think about her traveling alone, I get a little nervous. I want her to be super, I don't want to be hypocritical, but I'm also like, some of the things I've encountered, I just don't want her to have to encounter. So I know that she'll do it with grace. And she also is sort of interested in traveling alone as well. But it's interesting how that works. Yes, I want her to, she's also a huge Beryl Markham fan, and she read those books, when she was in 7th grade, and, and loves that sort of bravery. But now I think, oh my gosh, she's going to go off and, travel around Asia by herself. And,
Yay!
Yeah.
I remember Marsha, my daughter, calling in the middle of the night. When my kids travel, I always leave my phone on at night, and they're both young adults as well. And my daughter called and said, I'm in the middle of 2 train cars going from Germany to France. I'm certain I'm going the right way, but I think I'm on the wrong train. And it was like one of the proudest parental moments that I've had. And my son today is traveling and called and said, oh, I had to reroute my flight because there's a storm in Denver. And so I'm going to go through LA instead, and I'll be home a couple hours early. And he lives on the West Coast away from us. But I was like, wait, so you're 21 and you figured out a storm was coming. You changed your own flight. Yeah, could we get any more proud as parents? Not for me, I can't. That's it.
Yeah.
And Martha, you also know as a travel writer that it's those mishaps that make the good stories.
For sure.
And so
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think it's good to kind of get things done, know how to like reroute your plane, or know how to, well, if I'm going the wrong direction, that's easy. I just get off the other way, just figure it out. Yeah, that's the fun thing about traveling.
Yeah.
Well, allow me to presume to say that I think we've been going in the right direction this evening.
Thank you.
I am profoundly grateful that you came and talked to us about your very interesting work. And we are all going to listen to your podcast now, Lavinia and Kelly. And Marsha, I'm quite sure that we're going to be interested in your generally and your new book. And again, I'm going to say, if you're not a member of the WNBA NOLA, it's time to join. We're coming out of the pandemic. I feel like I should have a cocktail shaker saying anyone for a vodka martini, because we are just about to become fabulous in person again, as opposed to Zoom. And I again congratulate you on season 2, and can't wait to hear it. Thank you all for coming this evening. Don't make this your last WNBA NOLA event. There's more where this came from. There's, as they say in the New York subway system, there's a train right behind this one. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks.